Welcome to Wavelengths, a podcast with Amphenol Broadband Solutions.
So far, we've been mostly talking about on-campus networks, right? Or network support and strategies around the classroom. But education, as we know nowadays, extends way beyond the classroom. Not only does education continue at home, whether that is, handling LMS content at home, doing major projects that require a lot of bandwidth and then submitting them back to your teacher, even, for example, travel to school, bus Wi-Fi, right? There's actually a pretty lively debate right now around whether or not to subsidize hotspots and bus Wi-Fi with education in mind. We saw the FCC chair propose actually ending bus Wi-Fi and hotspot subsidies recently. And while at the same time, we're seeing like Nevada earlier in May, they expanded their EduRoam into public spaces. We saw Connecticut in July, they granted Connecticut gave grant funds around Wi-Fi for community centers and school fields. So it's like we're seeing kind of a push and pull here where as we're thinking about expanding network capacity, making it, more capable of handling in school classroom demand, there's also this wider ecosystem of strong fiber being the central nervous system for a lot of Wi-Fi services, a lot of roaming internet connectivity and out of classroom connection and service, right? So I'm curious if you see some of those supports ebbing and flowing, like what do you see as the smartest network design response here to support the way that students and the education ecosystem at large, mainly K through 12, is having to operate, right? Like, do you see value in fiber investments that end up supporting community Wi-Fi in your fields and libraries? Do you think there should be more of a push to start with fixed wireless to the home? Hey, even if the classroom is maybe not quite as robust, you can do all your gamified learning and all your content and LMS work at home, right? Or should we be looking at more EduRoam style roaming and sort of an expansion or a bridging of these connectivity investments beyond the education realm and creating buy-in from different stakeholders, right? So that these connectivity investments tackle a lot of areas and a lot of needs all at once. Any thoughts there on how that's shaping out and what your recommendations would be?
That is a really great question. I mean, from my standpoint, education just isn't at the school. It's at home as well. Again, you can go to school and have a great network, but, I have 5 kids, so, they're in all different grades. So half the stuff they have to do at home, everything has to be submitted from homework to everything has to be just submitted from home. If you don't have good bandwidth at home, you're going to flounder. And this is, where the BEAD funding really comes in to enable fiber to the home, kind of these, smaller communities, rural communities, to get that kind of bandwidth. But again, not just that, but to enable, Wi-Fi hotspots, community Wi-Fi at, local areas like the library. A lot of times you go to a library, it has really poor connectivity. Again, it's hard to work. It's hard to use the tools that you need to use for education. Again, if you're limited at home with bandwidth, the library at bandwidth, or you're out in a public space, trying to do, work or whatever that's going to be. Fiber has to be the baseline for all this. I mean, again, better Wi-Fi connectivity, more mesh, you said, direct wireless, looking at those kind of, connectivity to get from a school system out to maybe some of the places where most of the students, are, within a city or a town, for that. But no, it has to be expanded outside of the school. And that's this kind of being all inclusive of education. It's not school, it's everywhere today. And the nice thing is, we learned this with COVID, you can work from anywhere. So again, but you got to be able to have the bandwidth to do it. So again, you could be at school, but something happens at a school. It doesn't mean you can't continue to learn at home or something with that. But again, it's just to have that advantage, to have bandwidth, in your community that you could pretty much go anywhere to be able to use, the tools. And a lot of kids today have Chromebooks, things like that, to be able to pull up their tools, to be able to do their homework, to be able to succeed outside of school, kind of foster their minds to, hey, I'm interested in this subject. Let me go learn on it and not be limited by, oh, I can't do that because I have to go to the library. I can't get there today. Not to be able to do it from home or basically go outside or walk down the street, find a hot spot to be able to go do it. So this is kind of tackling the digital divide as well. So, again, I think there's a lot of funding out there to do it. And it's tumultuous times right now because, again, a lot of things are being defunded. Some things are funded. I think it really depends on the state, kind of where you're at. And again, that's a tough thing to do. I believe in connectivity. It's going to have to happen. We're going to have to fully mesh our environments from education, from work, from everything, from healthcare into, fire services, police safety, everything else comes with that. It all needs bandwidth to kind of connect itself together. So, while you're looking at that community anchor, not just for education, it's just the benefit again of the community of the services that you can bring to all the different areas.
I'm glad you brought up that kind of pendulum swinging of funding because, here on the podcast, we've been talking for years at this point about BEAD funding rollouts and how much of an opportunity it's going to be and how much it's going to, just really inject capital into the development of stronger, more capable, more dynamic networks. But at the same time, it's like we're also seeing other areas see these funding pullbacks, which in some ways are maybe even more immediately applicable. We know BEAD funding, seeing it realized is a protracted effort, right? So it's not something to even plan around, just, hey, next 12 months, we're good to go. And we've applied all our BEAD funding, right? So some states, for example, are tightening which sites count as community anchors. And for those who don't know on the call or on the podcast today, community anchor institutions are sites like schools, libraries, clinics, right, that can anchor fiber into a community. So you build around that institution, that community anchor, and then there's a ripple effect of benefits from starting there, sort of making your case and building buy-in with that institution as your starting point. So again, we have, like, for example, NTIA guidance that's narrowing definitions for community anchor institutions. This was back in June. But then on the flip side, you have like the Utah Education and Telehealth Network, which is upgrading its backbone to 400 gigabits, right? This was back in July. And this was an anchor first investment that was meant to deliver big statewide gains in network connectivity. So it's, once again, hit or miss, depends on where you're at, your municipality, your state. But it's clear that this idea of the community anchor, which we sort of mentioned before, right, as like, let's think strategically about where to invest our network build outs so that they benefit education, but education may not even be the primary buy-in generator, right? Regardless, if that scope narrows, where public dollars can land, do you think that this is going to impact network rollouts that benefit schools, right? Because to me, it seems like if community anchor institutions are going to kind of tighten up their definition state by state, a school probably wouldn't be tightened up. That would remain a cornerstone of a community anchor. But I might be wrong. You might be seeing other stuff out in the field. So what are your thoughts there? Like, is this going to impact how fiber is efficiently routed to schools and, or to neighborhoods to then benefit schools? I guess, like, how do you see this discussion or debate around community anchor institutions actually impacting any of these strategies and how schools and decision makers in schools should respond?
at least from a grant, from a, kind of that funding standpoint. Where's it going to come from? Who's going to fund it, and who's going to lose out? I mean, in the end, there's going to be winners, there's going to be losers. It's going to be kind of riding it out to see what happens.
Last trend I want to hit on with you before we get into a few other questions is on cyber security pressures, right? So we've been seeing recent news around K through 12 getting hit with ransomware. We were seeing this even in 2024 with the big ransomware wave, but it's continuing, right? Education ransomware attacks are actually up 23% year over year in the first half of 2025, which is pretty crazy. We saw recently over the summer, Ridgefield, Connecticut had a random ransomware incident. And, there are signs of federal support to, help fund some of the countermeasures to this. But, not every district can hire or build out some kind of security operations center, or even really robustly invest in solutions that, secure their networks. And sometimes their networks are part of a larger ecosystem of networks. So it's like you're having to, who owns that responsibility? Is it the CIO at the school? Is it, some board of cybersecurity experts? Is it the city itself that needs to be taking more responsibility for this? So I'm curious what your thoughts are, as these networks are improving, as we have more of these conversations where decision makers at schools are having to decide what tools or technologies do I invest in based on our network capacity. Where does cybersecurity fit into that conversation? And should school districts be taking more outsized responsibility to prioritize those investments, right? Or is there a different kind of equation here of responsibility and of, getting an improved network and helping, put your social capital behind getting those network buildouts launched and executed, while also getting the needed cybersecurity to protect those networks and protect against ransomware? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, you bring up a great topic. I mean, cybersecurity is critical today, just for the fact that, AI is great, but AI can also be extremely evil. What we're seeing, at least from a trend, from AI attacks is, again, they can do stuff 1,000 times faster than a human being can, meaning they can find penetrations, things like that so quickly. This is kind of twofold where, it's very critical in school that they have to have the cybersecurity. But as you said earlier, do they have the staff to be able to maintain that? This is where us as operators have to come up with, again, if they have a staff that can do it, they can deploy it, great, then they have it. But where us as operators have to look at is, how do we help the schools that don't have that kind of, skill set? Is it MSPs that we need to bring into the mix to help support it with that? Is it more technology that we use on our upstreams or for stuff like that that actually blocks an attack from even getting to the network? So how do we, thwart it on the front end? So this is something I'm faced with, not just in the education market, but every market that we're dealing from enterprise, from, banking, everything else. With the onset of AI and AI hacking, it's becoming dangerous. But the other thing is, AI can also counter AI. So again, having a good, AI security strategy to be able to counter that, look for patterns, look for things that it has, identify it early and be able to manipulate it quickly, kind of keep you, safe from those type of attacks. It's not going to slow down. Again, that's the one thing we've seen over the years, and I've been in this business a long time, and it's just getting more and more advanced, more and more technology driven behind it. It's able to adapt faster. Again, not just humans, but AI interfaces as well. There has to be funding that goes towards it, whether that's, again, another grant. Most of the RFPs we're dealing with today for any kind of education requires some kind of DDoS protection, some kind of security at a basic level, following basically state standards, depending on what those are. So I think there needs to be, while the connectivity is very important on the front end, again, you have to be able to operate and feel that your data is safe. Because again, you got a lot of private stuff out there in schools, records, all the other stuff that you got to keep safe from hackers and everybody else. So again, I think it's kind of comes hand in hand as you're building out a fiber network. again, you got the infrastructure to support the routing, the switching, but then you also need the infrastructure to support the security side of it, to keep the schools safe, to keep the community safe, to keep the kids safe ultimately.
And let's intersect that Eduroam example into this too, because that expands the threat landscape, right? For those who are maybe not familiar, Eduroam means a student's single sign-on, their single secure login works on campus, but also in some select public spaces. Basically you can toggle on and off where that SSO can be activated. So this is to keep some of those records safe, to make sure that you don't have bizarre student account takeovers, right? But also to kind of keep students focused on, hey, this is your education login, and it's a bit secure, it's a bit isolated, siloed. Well, what does it actually take with what you just said in mind to make that safe for things like K through 12, let's say certificate management or student privacy, right? If we're also trying to incentivize that flexibility of you can access this in different spots on different networks, well, now we're talking about a huge ecosystem of network security, which again broadens that field of responsibility. So with something like Eduroam in mind, would that change your answer at all, or would you give the same kind of advice and perspective?
I would give the same kind of advice. I mean, you have to look at, if you're going to put in like single sign-off, and again, you're going to roam, everybody does it today. Everybody's got their cell phone. There's different threat domains. It's not just external anymore. We see attacks internal and external that come in. So, while the kids are roaming, you have to have secure devices, basically whatever they're using. Do you have to do deep scans on them? No, but at least you can look for basically traffic coming into a network and realize this has been compromised, shut it off, basically alert them, have, basically whatever, it's a laptop, some kind of device, kind of cleansed. But again, this all has to be included in what the educators are looking at for the students, because it's not just them in the school, it gets them at home, it's them in public places. And again, it's just a bigger threat landscape now. It's not, hey, I'll lock down the school. You got to now look at everything as a connectivity model. Everything now has to have some kind of threat detection to it, because it's not just be coming from inside. You're going to have people getting from outside, whether it's VPN, whether it's direct connection, whether it's, through SSL, whatever that's going to be. You have now all these different domains that you have to protect against. So again, the security, I mean, that's why my answer would be the same. The security doesn't matter where you're sitting. The security has to be connectivity based. So meaning that I am protecting the connections that are coming into my network, not so much I'm protecting this device and this device. I'm protecting all those different legs that we're placing out there to the community.
All right, Chuck, we're approaching the end of the conversation. So I want to tie that UETN example again here, right? Again, Utah with massive investments, community anchor focused investments that are going to support connectivity that benefits the classroom and also out of classroom student engagement, right? So I'm curious your thoughts here on when a state education network, for example, scales up its capacity. You see a massive injection of funding and it's actually executed on, and you see that network capacity increase. Which classroom experiences from your background and your work doing this do you see move immediately, right? Like which ones benefit the most concretely and immediately from those investments? And the reason I ask this is because there's always a disconnect. It's like, hey, we're going to invest in the network so that X, Y, and Z technology or tool or workflow or curriculum mission gets supported. But intent versus impact is always different. So you may invest with one outcome in mind, yet something totally different actually pans out in the classroom. You see different things get supported, more engagement on certain things, or just tools working better. I don't know, XR labs, right? Or better dual credit systems or better AI tutoring investments. Like when those capacities increase, what are the immediate effects that you've seen? What benefits first?
Great question. I mean, my answer is going to surprise you. A lot of times it's the administration. It's how the teachers operate. It's how the administration operates. It makes them a lot more efficient, allow them to focus on teaching. Now, again, a lot of video learning comes from this. A lot of, they can go visit a museum in France and they can do a walkthrough real time with somebody. So again, it helps, on the education side because it lets people really see the world. So real time. This isn't a recording. This isn't something like when we used to have a videotape and you sit there and watch and you fall asleep. Today, you're actually interacting with people across the world. You're interacting with stuff you want to learn about, which gains that interest. So as these state networks are upgrading their bandwidth, again, it really drives the administration to focus on education curriculum. What do we need to bring in for tools? But then they now have the bandwidth to enable those tools that they want to do to continue the education, to spark that interest in the future, to take a kid and say, that's what I want to do. That's really what that bandwidth's enabling. It's from the teachers to the principals to basically even down to building security, building maintenance. Everything is included in that as you basically increase the bandwidth of the networks. It allows so much more connectivity, a lot more remote control. But again, we talked about security earlier. But again, it kind of opens everything up, to the classrooms. Again, it gives it just a broader view of everything. Again, if you're looking at state networks, they're limited on bandwidth. Again, then you have to start limiting what you could do, for a curriculum. As an educator, you want to give your students the best opportunity they can actually have. And by state networks investing in this higher bandwidth, it's allowing them to kind of open the faucet up for kids to learn.
Love it. And, I'm glad you gave administration a bone here because it's so true. Teachers nowadays are usually dealing with less and less classroom budget, more tools, more new workflows, evolving KPIs, standardized testing metrics change or get flipped on their head, or they're now managed through some new system, whatever. And so, it's like every time summer ends and you're back in the classroom, it seems like you're dealing with an entirely new education environment and new meta. So the last thing you also need is for your administrative capacities to be hindered by a garbage network, right? Or an unstable or overloaded network with low bandwidth. So it's great that you point that out because I think that's super true. If you have teachers who can operate more confidently, if you have administrators, school district officials who can operate more efficiently on the basics, that cascades, that creates positive ripple effects for people to put their attention more towards student outcomes, investments in technologies, investments in new curriculum strategies and teaching strategies that will benefit the core audience, which is students, right? So to end things on a really practical note, we've been talking a lot about network upgrades, right? And those usually are visualized as billions or millions at least of dollars pouring into a major network upgrade or laying new fiber in a rural environment, right? But we can sometimes get similar effects from last mile upgrades, more focused, acute sniper style upgrades to the network to at least start to move the needle while some of those bigger conversations are happening and, contracts are being dished out and argued, etc. So what are some of the main, let's say top three, if you have three, must-have last mile upgrades that you recommend inside a district, right, or at a school to feel that benefit? Right? What would you recommend for something more practical and more actionable that our audience could take away and act on today?
Well, first thing again is getting, off the legacy infrastructure, getting into a fiber infrastructure. That's key for everything we're going to do. That's going to help grow it. That's just what the future is going to be. The second thing is really looking at, what do I need to get to? How do I bring content closer to the edge? How do I bring content closer to the students? Whether that's on premise or maybe a conglomeration of schools, can actually come together to bring content closer to them. So again, they're not going across the world to relate it. So if they have, they might have great connectivity to an aggregation point, but from that aggregation point back, it might be slower bandwidth because, BEAD funding needs to happen or other funding needs to happen. It's really how do we push that content to the edge, whether that's AI, whether that's, content networks, whether that's learning, curriculum, all that stuff that comes with it to be there. And the third thing, just to upgrade it, a lot of it comes in the internal infrastructure of a building. You can put in a great network, But if you're running an old internal infrastructure inside of a building, you're still going to run the same problems you always have. You could have a 10 gig switch going in, you got Cat 3 cable running, you're not even going to be able to run 10 meg basic from your classroom. So your APs, all your switches, all your connectivity is there. So, I would start again in internal building, then, fiber basically back to aggregation point, and then, basically moving the content as close to the edge as possible would be my top three, I would say, to help as other things are coming to fruition, as you get better bandwidth, and then you can eliminate, because as you can get back to a rural area or more of a content center quicker, with bigger bandwidth, again, then you can eliminate your local content and move to different methods from there.
All right, Chuck, this has been a great episode. Thank you so much for your insights so far. Last question that I've got for you then is sort of a little lightning round, crystal ball peering question. Is looking ahead at the next, let's say, 12 months, maybe 24 months, with the context of BEAD funding becoming a little bit more materialized. We're starting to see these investments in improved fiber actually bear out into networks that schools can actually connect to and build their strategies off of. What are some of the major trends that you see bearing out in the classroom or in the larger sort of education connectivity space, based on how some of these network build-outs will actually proceed in the next 12 to 24 months? What are your thoughts on what's on the horizon?
Yeah, a lot of it's, again, I hate to always go back to AI, but it's going to be AI learning. How can we get information together? I mean, AI is just growing phenomenally. Here in the state of Texas, there's a lot of data centers going in very remote areas, which is forcing us to build, which is also good for the rural areas. Because we're building to a data center because, they need power out in the middle of nowhere. It allows us to pass a lot of school districts that might be underserved or might need, some kind of fiber connectivity. But, AI is going to be the bigger driver. I think distance learning and really collaboration, especially in the high school ages between colleges and high schools, to really spark interest and get them, kind of into college edge classes a little bit sooner because, again, having that connectivity, having that data, having that kind of opens those doors for them. But again, just, getting content in front of people, more robust content, more learning content, where you're learning stuff that typically you would have to go someplace to learn. Or, when I was a kid, there was always foreign exchange students. You could go to a foreign country and you could spend, a month there and kind of learn culture. Well, you can do that all remotely now. So you can actually sit there and learn about that. Yes, it's not the same experience, but VR is coming. VR has been here for a while. Kids can now do virtual tours. They can do virtual things with that really enhances the education. Again, these are all bandwidth drivers. So, over the like we've been kind of this entire discussion, the next 12 to 24 months is driving bandwidth to allow that type of stuff to kind of grow, to spark into new educational frontiers that, again, teachers and administration could take advantage of to get the best, kind of experience to their students. That's what any parent could ask for.
And I think on that optimistic note, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Folks, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. And Chuck, thank you to you for coming so prepared and ready to talk shop on a lot of stuff. I threw a lot of topics at you today. So thanks for talking shop with me. Again, folks, we've been speaking today with Chuck Girt. He's Chief Technology Officer at FiberLight. Chuck, if folks want to learn more about your background, your experience, your work, your thought leadership, or they want to learn more about FiberLight, how can they get in touch?
Basically, look us up online. FiberLight.com. So again, I'm on there. Feel free. I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out. Any questions on that? Again, just look Chuck Girt up on the internet. Usually you can find my LinkedIn profile. Again, happy to talk about any topic, outside of education. Again, I've been doing this a long time. I see a lot of the up and coming trends. I see trends come and die. So again, just kind of seeing the up and downs in the market, but happy to talk about anything, technology wise, whatever people want to discuss, I'm there.
Awesome. Love to hear it. All right, Chuck Girt, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to seeing you on some more Wavelengths content here soon.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for tuning in to today's episode of Wavelengths. If you like what you heard and saw, make sure you reach out to Chuck for some more insights and perspectives on this evolving connection between the world of education and its connectivity backbone. And make sure that you're checking out FiberLight as well and all the great work they're doing in their communities. And thanks, folks, for tuning into another episode of Wavelengths. Make sure you're subscribing on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Hit that subscribe button so you get notifications when we drop new episodes. And make sure you're heading to our website, amphenolbroadband.com, for more of our thought leadership, resources, and insights on the state of the industry. I'm your host, Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B, and we'll see you on the next episode of Wavelengths.